Welcome back to Only Talk Sports. So we talk sports every single day, or at least we try to. I'm Russ Jeffrey. Subscribe to the channel if you like sports content. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our video. Many people call him the king of transfer portal recruiting, and there is a reason why. Because Bill Self, he has done it yet again, bringing in another quality transfer portal addition for the Kansas Jayhawks for next season, with Rylan Griffen, the former Alabama guard, announcing that he is committed to the Kansas Jayhawks. And he is not the only player they have brought in this offseason. He is now the fourth transfer portal addition that Bill Self has been able to add, and they're all quality players. I'm going to go over whether I believe that the Kansas Jayhawks can be a legitimate national title contender next season after having a bit of a disappointing season this past year. Now, we know that Kansas is one of the bluest of blue bloods because even though they only have 4 national titles, they rotate with the Kentucky Wildcats for most all-time wins. They have a Hall of Fame coach in Bill Self who's won them 2 of those national titles, and year in and year out, Kansas is always at the top of the Big 12. But this past season, they weren't as good as they normally have been. They usually are always at the top of the league, but they were actually a team that was more toward the middle of the conference. But partially it was because of the fact that Bill Self, even though he did bring in some good players through the portal, the bench just did not develop for Kansas. Guys like Nicholas Timberlake that were brought in to really be key players off the bench and shoot the basketball at a high level, it just never really came to fruition for Kansas with those guys being able to give Kansas significant minutes. And some of the freshmen that they brought in with their talented recruiting classes, they haven't translated either. And Kansas also had injuries to Hunter Dickinson and Kevin McCullough this past season that really hurt their ability to have a lot of success. Kevin McCullough's injury was more serious, but unfortunately it was just too much for Kansas to overcome to have a great season. But still, all in all, they were a consensus top 25 team, and they still made the round of 32. But Kansas this year, they're looking to erase all that from this past season. They want to be a legitimate national title contender yet again, and there is a really good chance that they will be with all the moves that they're making, because Joe Tipton tweeted out earlier today that Alabama transfer guard Rylan Griffen has committed to Kansas. The 6'6" sophomore averaged 11 points per game this past season, and he shot nearly 40% from the three-point line. And he's gotten a lot better as a player as well, because as a freshman, he only averaged 5 points per game, and he upped it to 11 points per game this past season at Alabama, and he improved his three-point shooting. And this is what he said about committing to the Kansas Jayhawks. I chose Kansas because Coach Bill Self and the coaching staff are going to push me to be the best player that I can be. I think I fit in because they said they needed shooting, and I think I can help them in that area. I think I can help them with perimeter defense and help get stops and help carry on the same winning culture they've always had. Definitely they have a winning culture, and because of Bill Self's ability to bring in all these quality players, whether it's now through the portal or whether it used to be him bringing in high school recruits, which he still does at a high level, and then those guys develop over many seasons, that's why Kansas has been such a tough team year in and year out. And Rylan Griffen is absolutely accurate when he says that Kansas needed perimeter shooting. The Jayhawks were not a great three-point shooting team this past season, even though Hunter Dickinson, with him being 7'1" and has the ability to step out and shoot threes, he didn't hit them on a regular basis. And again, some of the other players that Kansas had that were supposed to be good shooters this past year, they just did not really develop. But immediately when Rylan Griffen entered the portal from Alabama, it was definitely looking like Kansas was going to end up being the favorite to land him, and they were able to. And it's very tough for Alabama because Rylan Griffen did improve over 2 seasons at Alabama with Nate Oates as head coach. But unfortunately, even though he did improve, it's just the day and age that we live in now, where players, even if they are starters and they're having a lot of success in a program, they still might move on to another school. So it's a tough loss for Nate Oates, but I'm sure he's going to be fine bringing in some quality players to the portal. He does it every single season. And Rylan Griffen at one point in the year for Alabama averaged 14 points per game during a 17-game stretch, and he also shot 48% from 3 in the NCAA tournament, so that is huge as well. But as I said earlier, Rylan Griffen is not the only player that Kansas has brought in through the portal. He is one of 4 players that Bill Self has been able to bring in, and all 4 players are going to have massive roles next season for the Jayhawks. Zeke Mayo, the transfer from South Dakota State, I feel like he's going to be a better version of Nicholas Timberlake. He's coming from a smaller school, and he shot well from the three-point line, but I believe that his game is more translatable to the Big 12 than Nicholas Timberlake's was. So Zeke Mayo, look for him to have a solid impact role off the bench, in my opinion. Riley Kugel from Florida, I know a lot of people were complaining about him when he committed to the Kansas Jayhawks back on Easter Sunday because he's not a great three-point shooter, but he's still got a lot of talent. He was only a sophomore this past season for Florida, a former top 100 recruit, and he was on some NBA draft radars this past season. And even though he did not have a really good season at Florida, he kind of just played around the same as he did as a freshman. I still think he has a lot of potential. And who better than Bill Self to untap that potential out of Riley Kugel? And even if he's not a great three-point shooter, the fact that you are bringing in Zeke Mayo, who's a good three-point shooter, now you're bringing in Rylan Griffen, who's a really good three-point shooter. You might not need Riley Kugel to be all that good of a shooter, because if he's being surrounded by players that are really good shooters, that's going to help him be able to go off the dribble and drive into the lane, which he is really good at doing. But I still think Riley Kugel is going to get better from three, and if he does, that's just an added bonus for Kansas. And then you get AJ Storr as well. That's the headline transfer portal edition. For a lot of teams, Riley Kugel or Rylan Griffen would be the headline transfer portal edition for a program, but Kansas also got AJ Storr, who averaged over 15 points per game this past season in Wisconsin. And even though he did kind of struggle from the three-point line this past year, I believe that's because Wisconsin is in the Big Ten, and it's much more difficult for teams to have a free-flowing open offense in that conference. Now that AJ Storr is going to be in the Big 12 and surrounded by more talent at Kansas, I think that's going to untap his offensive game even further, and that could help him develop into an NBA player. So again, Kansas really struggled from three this past season, ranking 11th in the Big 12 conference in three-point percentage and last in three-point attempt rate. That's going to end. This season, they brought in 4 transfers that have all made at least 1 3 per game, and they all shot at least 34% from three-point range for their college careers. So that is fantastic news for Kansas. And the Jayhawks also returned DeJuan Harris Jr. and KJ Adams. So even though Kansas is losing Kevin McCullough and they're losing some of their bench players from this past season, they got 2 quality starters coming back from this past season's team. DeJuan Harris is a very good point guard. KJ Adams is a solid front court player. And now you're bringing in these 4 transfer portal players that are all going to have to fight for minutes. And you know they're going to do everything they possibly can to shine at Kansas. And I think especially guys like Rylan Griffen and AJ Storr, they're going to have big roles next season for the Jayhawks. And the big question for Kansas, the cloud that is hanging over the program, is whether center Hunter Dickinson is going to return to Lawrence for next season or go off to the NBA. And I think if he comes back, I completely agree with this article saying that if Dickinson does return to Lawrence, the Jayhawks are going to be the favorite to open the 2024-2025 season, ranked at number 1. There's a lot of other programs that have a case for it right now. Duke looked like they were going to be easily the favorite in college basketball next season to start the year ranked at number 1, but they've lost some talented players from this past season. And even though they got a really good freshman class, Duke's going to have to do a little bit more work in the transfer portal to have some more experience for them to possibly be the number 1 team. But if Hunter Dickinson returns, and then you have DeJuan Harris and KJ Adams and all these transfer portal players, plus I haven't even mentioned that Kansas has a really good recruiting class coming in, headlined by Flory Badunga, who is going to be a really good player in college basketball, I believe. He should back up Hunter Dickinson at the 5 position if Hunter Dickinson does return to Kansas. If Hunter Dickinson does not, then Flory Badunga probably will be the starting center, but I believe he should be able to adjust to the college game fairly well. But Hunter Dickinson, he needs to let Bill Self and the Jayhawks know soon whether he is going to come back or not, so Bill Self can determine whether he wants to roll with Flory Badunga at the 5 or if he can bring in a solid transfer portal center, because there's still some good players out there. But we'll definitely have to see. The Jayhawks are doing fantastic in the transfer portal right now. They have the second best transfer portal recruiting class right behind the Indiana Hoosiers, who have been doing fantastic in the portal this offseason with Mike Woodson at head coach. But I know some Jayhawks fans were worried whether they were going to have a really good team next season with some of the players that they were losing and the type season they had this past year. But the Jayhawks, they have solved a lot of the problems from this past season's team. They did not have a lot of depth on their bench, and they did not have enough three-point shooting. And all these transfer portal additions, including Rylan Griffen, they solved those problems. They're going to have more bench depth, and they're going to have a lot more three-point shooting next season. And now they just got to wonder what Hunter Dickinson is going to do, whether he returns to Lawrence or goes off to the NBA. And if he does come back, then the Jayhawks are probably going to end up being the number 1 team in the preseason top 25 poll in college basketball for next season. And Kansas definitely has Bill Self to thank for it. But let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. What you think about Rylan Griffen transferring to the Kansas Jayhawks, and whether you believe that he's going to help solve a lot of the issues that the Jayhawks had this past season with three-point shooting and providing more depth for the Jayhawks as well, and how good of a job you think Bill Self has done in the transfer portal so far, and if you believe if Hunter Dickinson returns, whether you think the Jayhawks are going to be the preseason number 1 team in college basketball for next season. Subscribe to the channel if you like sports content. Like this video down below. Follow me on Twitter as well. Link is in the description, and I'll see you next time.